Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are.
Welcome, everybody. It is time for the Books That Make You show, and I am your host, Desiree Duffy. And today, we're talking about books that make you write and publish your own successful books. When we read books, people often, eventually, usually feel that tug to write your own book. Look at it this way. Every writer who ever was and will be and is started as a reader. So now that you feel that pull to put pen to paper or your fingertips to the keyboard, just how is it that you go about that? In Self-Publish and Succeed, the trusted best-selling author and entrepreneur Julie Broad shows you just that. Writing a successful nonfiction book a lot of times starts long before you even write your first chapter. To write a book that boosts your brand and generates a profit and makes you an influencer in your industry, you need the no boring books way. Julie is the founder of self-publishing services firm Book Launchers, and she's an Amazon overall #1 best-selling author. Her popular YouTube channel, you might recognize her from booklaunchers.tv, where she teaches nonfiction authors how to write and market books that people want to read. She's an expert on writing and marketing, and Julie has been speaking on stages across Canada and the United States since 2009, providing lots of the best approaches to getting results, making an impact, and ultimately making more money with your writing. Julie, hello. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with that big question, because so many people, yes, they do. They get that urge, that tug to write that book, especially as you indicate in your book, for nonfiction authors, for people who are establishing themselves as an influencer. And then they have that idea, but then it just kind of flitters away. Why do you think so many people start that book, but then they don't finish it?
Well, I wish there was one simple reason, because then we could solve it and help everyone get their book out there. But there's so many reasons. I think one of the reasons is that people get really inspired to write a book, but inspiration is fleeting and you really need commitment. Like that, bottom line, if you want to write, publish, and then market that book, you have to be committed to it. That's the first piece of it. The second piece is maybe a lot of people don't necessarily know what to do. They start writing and they're all excited, but then they're like, is this crap? Is this any good? Is anybody going to read it? And you don't necessarily know. Or then there's other people who they start writing and then all of a sudden they're thinking about, how am I going to get this in the bookstores? Well, they don't even have a book yet, but they're worried about how they're going to get there. So, that's kind of the step-by-step piece. There's also sometimes the fact that you just don't have capacity. And I encountered this with my fourth book that's coming out later in 2023. And I got 3/4 of the way through, and my business was having some challenges. Personally, I was having some major challenges, and I just couldn't, even if I had carved out time, I didn't have the energy for the book. And so finally I realized I run a company that has writers. So I asked a writer to help. I know it seems ridiculous to me that it didn't occur to me sooner. But I've always written my books myself. And so 3/4 of the way through, I turned it over to a writer, and boom, a month later, the book was done. So, so that was magical.
I love that. Yeah, it's like magic. It's like, boom, instant book. You're touching on something. I do want to get into the editing process and all of that, because there's different stages, and I want to unpack that with you. But you're bringing up something that I think is so important that writers hear, and it's okay to ask for help. Yeah. It's okay to get a ghostwriter. And I'm going to use air quotes there because I think people see that as a cop-out. A ghostwriter is used by somebody who isn't a real writer, but that's not always the case. What do you think?
No, I mean, well, and it wasn't even the reason I hadn't used one. I like writing. So I had always written my books. But even at book launchers, we call them ghostwriters, but really it's a writing assist. Because the reality is, I think part of the issue is when you think of a ghostwriter, you think of somebody who's been paid $100,000 to go write a celebrity memoir, and they're going to follow the celebrity around and then write the book. And it's not really the celebrity's book. It's really theirs, but they've been paid to write it. Whereas what we do is very collaborative, right? Nothing goes on the page without the author. So as I tell people, you're still going to feel pain. Like, this is not a pain-free way to write, because you still have to think through who's your reader, how are you helping them, what's the stories, what are the messages. And that still has to come from you, or you have to do some research and draw from that research and then give that to the writer. And then the writer might be the one that toils over how to phrase a sentence, but you're still experiencing what I think is the hardest part of writing, which is thinking of what you're going to share and how it's going to impact a reader and how to kind of explain it so it does.
Right, exactly. You're still infusing your expertise and your knowledge and your experience. And that, I love that you call them writer assists. Is that what you said?
A writing assist. Yep.
I love that. I love that, because that nails it. And I know plenty of writer assists, ghostwriters, editors, content developers, book doctors. Sometimes they come up with very creative ways to describe it. But what it boils down to a lot of times is finding out how you need to work with that writer. And I see a lot of times it can run the gamut. Yeah. Sure. Like you said, it can be that celebrity ghostwriter following somebody around and taking copious notes. Or it can be taking something that's almost fully fleshed out and just kind of organizing it and putting it together and kind of putting some of the finishing touches on it in such a way that makes it marketable.
There's not one way. That's the thing. Like, I love that you've kind of said that there's not one way to get a book done, and not even one way to work with a writer. So,
yeah. And one of the things that you say that I really want to flesh out more is most books are boring. Is that right? Is that what you think?
I don't necessarily think most books are boring. However, I do think if you pick up this came from, I'll give the origin of this. So I was a real estate investor. My first book, the one that went to #1 overall on Amazon, was a real estate investing book. I'd read probably 75 real estate books by the time I wrote my book. And the reality was, after you've read a couple, they all sound very much the same, and they aren't that interesting. They're going through how to calculate cash flow, how to find an area, how to find how to find investors, all those pieces. And so they get boring fast. And I think that a lot of authors they just spew information, and they don't necessarily take the time to think about what's the reader experience in consuming this information. The information might be good, but to me, there's no reason why a nonfiction book shouldn't be almost a page turner, if not a page turner, even if it's a how-to, because there's lots of ways to do it. And then you get people read it, they remember it, they tell others about it, and then you can get a lot of momentum and not even have to do anything.
I think that's really important, because you mentioned real estate, and there's many industries where developing your influence, it counts, it matters. And that's really what a lot of times the goal is. You see it too with financial advisors. And there's certain industries where when you write a book, it helps you develop that brand recognition and that gravitas. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that there's several ways that you can keep from being just that, kind of cookie cutter approach. Can you name one or two of them for us?
Yeah, for sure. One of them is stories. So bringing in, if you have them, bringing in your own personal stories. And if you don't have those, then finding stories from others, whether it's your clients, whether it's friends, or if you do some research and kind of extract stories from others, that's one big thing. The other thing is in how you write. Because I could give quite a few examples, but one of them is especially for people who are higher educated. In many ways, like I did an MBA, and we are taught to write with jargon and big words. Like, you are rewarded, the bigger the word almost, the more likely you are to get an A. It is the opposite in book writing. And if you write to sound smart, it will not be a good read. It will be very boring, hard to read, and you'll alienate probably your ideal reader. So that's another one, is to really write at a grade 8 or even a grade 7 level. And if you're not sure, you can always run it through different online tools to get they call it the Flesch-Kincaid score. But that's one way, is just to write at a level that, a younger, like a kid, would understand. And that can make it a lot more interesting.
Yeah. And two, being conversational in that writing. And I love the fact that you mentioned bringing stories and narratives into it. A lot of times when we think of nonfiction books, we think of them as being that dry, more academic read. But it is so important to have narrative arcs in it and to tell a story, because I think at the core, we're all wired for story. We want stories in our lives. We want to hear those tales.
Yeah, that's how our lessons have been passed on, for generations and generations. Like, you think back to the cavemen, and they wrote story on the side of the wall.
Yeah, exactly. And even when we, our history books, when we know the story, I know so many people, they love historical fiction, or they love to, read a story about Cleopatra, or, take your pick, but they probably fall asleep over that academic, that history book when they were taught it in class. Yeah. You're so right. So now, okay, you're on, and I do want to ask you about your forthcoming book, but now you've written 3 books. What was that experience like for you as a writer, writing your first and second book? Let's go back to those.
Yeah. I didn't know. My first book, I was rejected by traditional publishing after they actually gave me an idea and we built a proposal together. They still rejected me, saying I couldn't sell enough books. And that was actually really good, because it pushed me to learn all I could about self-publishing, marketing a book, making sure I could write a book that would sell. And so I tried to do everything as good or better than a traditionally published book, which put a lot of pressure on me. But it was a hard experience trying to figure out, because it's not just, okay, I need a content editor, I need a copy editor, I need a proofreader, I need a cover designer, I need a layout. Where do you find them? How do you know if they're good? How do you hire them? How do you know what to pay them? When you're looking at their work, how do you know if they did a good job or not? There's so many pieces. And so it was almost a full-time job for me, going through that process and kind of making sure the book was as great as it could be. With the second book was a little easier, but I had the problem of my first book did so well. I had this, like, what's the point? This book isn't going to do as well as the other one. Like, I had mental battles on the second book, which, thankfully by the third book, I'd kind of gotten over myself. It was like, whatever, I just need to write a great book. But yeah, it's a journey, and a lot of people think it's just about writing the book, and writing the book is challenging for sure. But the entire process, and then the real work, honestly, begins when you're marketing the book.
Yeah, and we can get into that a little bit too. I'm curious though, Julie, what did you learn, if anything, about yourself? Did you discover anything about your own self as you were embarking on your writing journey?
Always. There's so many. I call them monsters, right? So there's 4 main monsters in my mind that most of us face, and everyone has a bigger one. Some of them aren't always the giant ones, but there's 4. There's fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of success, and imposter syndrome. And for me, the fear of judgment is always like my big giant monster that just hangs out with me. I've learned to give it sandwiches, and that's, it's like, okay, buddy, kind of like a kid, right? I have a 6-year-old. It's kind of like that. It's like, hey, listen, here's some snacks. You're coming along for the ride no matter what, but here's some snacks. Just keep your mouth quiet. And so that's kind of, I learned to work through that and to focus on the reader, because as soon as I would focus on myself, like, oh, I wonder what people are going to think when they read this, it would bring the monster like loud, like to the front seat of the car instead of having it in the back seat. And it was hard. But if I was like, okay, what does the reader need to know? What do I have to share? How's the reader going to experience this? Instead of thinking about myself, it really helped. Not easy to do always, but that's one thing I really learned. Every time I write the book, I relearn that lesson. But that one is the one that I fought the most with the first book in particular.
You've mentioned self-publishing, and I think that many years ago that label was, something to be ashamed of, and it has changed so much. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you feel that the self-publishing world has changed in the last 5 years, 10 years, even 15 years?
Yeah, it's still interesting because I spoke at the American Library Association's LIBEX big event in earlier this year. There's still librarians that hold self-publishing against us. So it hasn't changed completely. I think the readers don't care as much if you do it well. But it has been an evolution. And I think we are almost at the point where all that matters is the quality of the book. And is it the best, is it a book that's going to be the best for whoever, whether it's libraries, bookstores, readers, audiences. I think we're almost there. But the challenge is there's people that anybody can publish a book. And so there's still people who publish books full of mistakes. They look terrible. And that can really hurt the whole self-publishing. It's like the few that do it that way can hurt the entire kind of group of us that are self-publishing. And that was the challenge early on in particular, because there was so many hoops to get through to self-publish. People often didn't know what to do or didn't do it well. But again, I always tell people if they're questioning, I'm like, when was the last time you searched for Penguin Random House's latest release? And people always laugh. They're like, well, I never have. Exactly. No reader searches for what's Wiley put out this month? Nobody really looks at it that way. They're like, I would like to read a book on, the latest in the keto diet, or I'd like to read a book on, innovative leadership strategies for, the next decade. That's what they're searching for. And so that's why I'm always talking to people about focusing on your reader and creating the best experience for that reader, no matter what.
You are bringing up so many things that I want to dig into, and I don't know if we're going to have enough time for everything, because you nailed it when you were talking about the quality. And yeah, it's unfortunate that almost anybody can write a book and put it out on Amazon or wherever, and it does kind of bring down the industry of self-publishing as a whole. But it goes back to quality. So let's dig back into that editing process, because you've mentioned it. There are several stages to editing. And I think sometimes first-time authors don't realize it's more than just having your 6th grade English teacher check your grammar. Do you want to talk about editing a little bit?
I would love to, because this is one of the places that my heart breaks for authors, because they hire an editor and they think they're doing the right thing, and they've just hired an editor. And the reality is, to have a really, truly great book, I've heard it both ways. I've heard some say, the editor didn't correct any grammar. And then I've also heard them say, the editor polished my book, but it's actually not a better read. And the issue wasn't necessarily the editor. It was the expectation of what kind of editor you'd hired, because there's developmental or content edit. And that's the 30,000-foot view look at your book. That's the one that's going to make it a better read from a structural perspective, from a flow, from a reader clarity, all of those pieces. And that one does not correct grammar. They might correct a few things, but they're just going through how can we make this a better read, a more compelling read? The copy edit is the one that most people think of when they think of editing, because it's sentence structure, word choice, grammar, punctuation. Very important, however, very different than that content edit, because they're going through line by line, making each sentence, read really well, usually deleting words and, changing how things are structured sentence wise. Very different. And then a proofread goes through for consistency. Have we always use the same acronym when we refer to something? Are we putting, in my case, I swear they add 200 commas, that kind of thing. And some people will hire one editor and say the editor is doing all the things, but I truly don't think a good developmental editor can do a great copy edit, because the developmental editor has a different way of looking at things. For us, it's journalists, ghostwriters, and book coaches that do content edits, and the copy editor is an amazing rule follower. Those are two different personalities.
Yeah, I agree. And in some cases, yes, somebody might be a unicorn and have both of those personalities. Yeah. But still, if they're doing it all for your book, they don't have that ability to take a step back and see things subjectively, I think.
Yeah. I like having other sets of eyes on the book too, because that everybody sees, even that's why we do a different person from proofread to copy edit, because a copy editor could do a good proofread. They have very similar skill sets, but we like that other set of eyes because we all have bias, and there's certain things that certain people will always miss as a mistake, and then somebody else will immediately pick it up.
Yep, exactly. Now, you mentioned the marketing and search and the reader and how all of that has changed. Do you want to talk a little bit about your philosophies on marketing nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if it's nowadays. I think it's always been something you need to pay attention to. I think one of the issues with self-publishing is people write the book and then figure out how to sell the book. And you need to be thinking about how you're going to sell this book the minute you think you're going to write a book, because that's where the reader comes in. And how are you going to find that reader? And how are you going to position the book? So not just so it's something they go, oh, that sounds cool. It's like they need to go, I need to read that book right now. Right. And so you have to make sure the book has the ingredients in it so that when it's baked, somebody wants that thing right now. And that takes layering into the entire process and always thinking about marketing. And then once your book is out, consistently doing something every day or on a regular basis to find that reader with the book that you worked so hard to create.
Mm-hmm. Now, you say that you have there is a simple page, excuse me, let me back up. The one simple page that could generate thousands of sales. What's that about?
Yeah, it's just a simple page at the back of your book where you let people know that they can buy in bulk. And sometimes you'll promote your speaking as well on that page, but letting people know that they can buy in bulk, most people won't be interested. But all it takes is one or two people who go, hey, I want to buy a copy for my entire organization and I can get a discount. And then they email you and sell it. And I mean, this isn't necessarily for fiction, but for nonfiction, this happens. This is how a lot of our authors will sell 500, 800 copies of their book because it fits with an organization's motive or lesson plan or training objective or values. And they want everybody in their organization to have a copy of the book, and they'll buy it for a Christmas gift or for an event, those kind of things. But if you don't have that page, sometimes people won't necessarily think to reach out to you and try to buy in bulk.
Yeah. And I know you do speaking engagements, and those back of the room sales, like you're talking about, that can have a big impact too. So even if you're going to be speaking, or to even suggest that, put it in people's minds. If they get done reading the book and they see that in the back, it's like, oh, wait, my organization is looking for speakers, and they make that connection.
Yeah, for sure. I'm the learning chair of my local entrepreneur organization chapter. And I get probably every day, it feels like, maybe not, somebody from the chapter is like, get this person in to come speak. And half the time it's because they just read the book and they loved the book. So, there's definitely power in that, because if it's easier for somebody like me to find out, how do I contact them? What do they do for speaking, or do they even do speaking? That will make the job a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Now, you say that there are 7 places that people can sell their books besides that one that starts with the letter A. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, everybody focuses on Amazon. And I mean, the reality is that a lot of books will sell through Amazon. But I'm a big fan of not giving Amazon all the power, because they've made it easier to get your book into the hands of reader than ever before as a self-published author. They've also done some things that aren't very kind to authors. So I like to make sure they're not the only game in town. So I like to sell through other places like Apple and Kobo and Barnes and Noble. There's, of course, a lot of other kind of subscription services out there as well that you can tap into. I like to have libraries. I like to have independent bookstore distribution. And then I like to do other things that are a little unexpected. Like, I have sold books in CrossFit gyms. I've had clients who've sold their books in dentist office, chiropractic offices, travel agencies. So there's lots of places to sell books. You just get a little creative and see where your readers might be.
Oh, I love that. That is very creative. And sometimes we get very myopic in our thinking and think that Amazon is the only game in town. They do sometimes feel like that 800-pound gorilla in the room where they dominate. And I think it's important too, especially for first-time authors, to realize your librarian down the street, she is never going to order a book off of Amazon. They are, in a lot of ways, they're a retailer. Other bookstores aren't necessarily going to order off of Amazon, because Amazon would love you to stay within their ecosystem and not do any kind of traditional distribution. You mentioned some of the other places like Kobo and Apple, etc., Barnes and Noble. So remembering that Amazon, for all intents and purposes, is a retailer, no matter what they want to call themselves. Let's pivot just a little bit and go over to booklaunchers.tv. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's my YouTube channel. And we have new videos every Tuesday and Friday, except for July. Every year we kind of take a little break in July. So you can catch up on all the videos because there's like 600 now. But there's videos on how to write, how to, the whole publishing process, and then of course marketing, because that's a big passion of mine. So lots of tips. And then we do live streams every other Tuesday. So it's a really fun time, and we do prizes and just get to hang out. And we have a really wonderful community of people that comment and participate. And if you ever have questions, you can post the question. If I don't have a video, then that gives me ideas for future videos. So I like that.
That's excellent. Well, and the fact that you have so many videos is just a testament to how much knowledge and how much information there is for writers and authors and professionals that are looking to write and market their own book. Okay, Julie, you teased us a little bit with your forthcoming book. Can you tell us what's coming up next?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I wrote Self-Publish and Succeed as kind of the guide to write a book. When I started, my intention was it would be like a one-stop shop for everything to write, publish, and promote a book. But then I realized, whoa, that's way too much to put into one book. So that book is on how to write it. Now I have one called Self-Promote and Succeed that will be coming out, and it will be on how to market that book. And it talks a lot about the marketing layers, but also, if this is your goal, like your big picture goal, what tactics should you use? Because there's lots of different goals for nonfiction authors, and there's a bazillion things to do, and it can be really overwhelming. So we tried to break it down, but it's a big book because it's a huge subject.
Oh, yeah, a huge subject. When you have that book, when that book releases, please let us know, because I'd love to have you come back on the show and talk about that one too.
Oh, that would be my pleasure. Thank you so much.
You bet. You bet. Okay, Julie, tell everybody where they can go to find you, find your website, your books. Give us all of your details.
Yeah, besides booklaunchers.tv, booklaunchers.com/7 steps is a great place to go, because you'll get a download on how to write a book that's set up to sell. And then you'll also get all the links. You can hit reply to that email and it goes straight to me. So it gets you all the contact information that way.
Excellent. Julie Broad, thank you so much for being with us today on the Books That Make You show.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
You bet. You bet. And thank you, everybody, for being with us as well. You can find out more about us on our website. It's booksthatmakeyou.com. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and of course, YouTube. Make sure that you ring the bell, subscribe. Don't miss any of our great guests like we have with Julie here today. Until next time, all of my bookish buddies, please enjoy all of the books that make you exactly who you are.
The host and executive producer of the Books That Make You show is Desiree Duffy. Sound mastering and engineering by Dave Napox. Social media and content promotion by Siddhi Jahagirdar. Copywriting and editing by Mike Robinson. The Books That Make You show is an award-winning podcast produced by Black Chateau Enterprises.